Good morning, friends. Welcome to Chat with Chitra. My guest today is Professor Julian Lloyd Webber, a British solo cellist and a conductor, and former principal of the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. He's also the founder of the Harmony Music Education Program. It is my great honor to be speaking to you today, Professor Julian. Thank you for your time. How are you today?
Very good. It's just quite sunny in London, and it's a good day.
That's very good to know. What were your growing up years like?
It was an extraordinary upbringing, really. We were in this big, old flat in South Kensington in the days when that area was not quite as salubrious as it is now. There were so many people in that flat. There was obviously both my parents and my grandmother. And we had later on a concert pianist called John Lill, who was living with us as well. And of course, myself and Andrew. All of us were musicians. And um, the noise in that flat was really quite extraordinary. And the neighbors were unbelievably tolerant looking back. But we had people, my father was a teacher at the Royal College of Music, was a professor there all his life, basically. So he went to the college there and went straight from being a student to being a professor. So he was pretty talented, I have to say. And so we had students coming in and out all the time. And my mother was also a specialist teacher of young children on the piano. And so some of her pupils would come, although most of her lessons were given outside. I'd be practicing the cello. Andrew would be always composing something on the piano. And my father as well, if he could get enough silence to do his composition, which wasn't very often. So it was extraordinary place. But of course, when you're a child, you think wherever you're brought up is normal, and that's happening maybe everywhere. It was only later that I found out quite what a strange upbringing it was.
It must have been incredibly enriching to be surrounded by so many musicians most of the time. Was it at that point in your life that you thought you would be taking music as a career?
At the beginning, I remember my mother, as she would do, tried to start me off on the piano, and it didn't work at all. And perhaps that's not a good way to learn with one of your parents. So I registered at the age of 4 that if I asked to take up another instrument, perhaps she'd let me give up the piano. And so I asked to play the cello after she had taken me to a concert for young children. I thought it looked an interesting instrument to play and a very natural instrument to play. This sitting position and the way it's just like I'm sitting here now. And and you can play. There's nothing unnatural about it, like the violin, where you have to perhaps turn your hand. It's more.
Yeah.
When I received a very small 8-size cello, I just thought it was a bit of a hobby. I enjoyed playing it, whereas I'd hated playing the piano. I really enjoyed playing the cello. Um, but I didn't practice properly, and I never really thought I would take it up. That came quite a lot later, and I actually made that decision that I wanted to be a solo cellist when I was 13. I
Oh,
saw the great Russian cellist Rostropovich in a series of concerts in London, and I was just bowled over is the expression. I just thought he was fantastic, and I thought I, this is what I want to do for myself. But of course, I hadn't practiced properly up to that point, and so I had a lot of catching up to do and a lot of technical work to do. Um, and and I got on and did that and started basically at that point neglecting my schoolwork and making sure I got into one of the major music colleges in the UK. And I was determined to do that.
that's very interesting. How was your bonding with your brother whilst growing up? Did you compose music together?
No, I mean, he always composed the music, but I did collaborate with him. He's 3 years older than me, and he had a toy theatre, which I would use, made up with sort of the model soldiers and things you can get. At least you could then, I'm sure you still can. Um, and so we created this theatre. So that was a collaboration. But at quite an early age, I think he was about, well, would have been 13, so therefore I'd have been 10. He went off to a boarding school. So then I didn't really see that much of him. And I think it would be fair to say, and he would say it too, that we basically always did our own thing. I mean, he was fascinated by the theatre. I was fascinated by the cello and by through the cello classical music. So we were both working at music, but in slightly different, well, very different fields, really. Although we did share interest in each other's music. I mean, I loved some of the musicals that he loved. I mean, he was brought up on Richard Rodgers and South Pacific, Sound of Music, Oklahoma, those wonderful shows which are still
Mm.
stand the test of time today.
Mm.
So I loved those as well, and he often came to the classical concerts with me. So, we both have a knowledge of quite a strong knowledge of different areas of music.
That's really good to hear. As a child, how did you deal with performance anxiety issues?
These are very interesting questions, and it's exactly a topic that I'm really considering at the moment. Since I left the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire as principal at the very end of September, it's kind of taken me back. I've had more time, and so obviously when you have time, you start to think, and you think back over your life and your career. And I think one of the things that has interested me most is the whole psychology of performing and what makes a top performer and what qualities you need to have, because it's talent is by no means enough. I mean, it's just the given starting point. If you don't have talent, you can't possibly succeed. But there are many exceptionally talented musicians I've met over the years who haven't had the other qualities that are needed. And of course, as a principal of a music college, you see the way that students progress, and some have got that dedication and ambition and total determination to succeed, whereas others may be very talented, but you perhaps can tell that that may be not there, or not there in enough quantities. So in that way, I felt I could help very much, and perhaps still can in my new role. And this is a subject I'm very interested in. So I think your conference is a fascinating topic, and will throw up a lot of things which could be very useful. Um, but to answer your question, at the beginning, when I was very young, and as I said, just playing for fun, a bit of a laugh and something to enjoy. And it's when, of course, I started taking it more seriously. And when I think I was at the Royal College of Music when I was 17, 18, and I'd won a scholarship there. And I was put to lead the orchestra right at the beginning. And I felt under more scrutiny and under more pressure. And in my early years at college, I had 4 years there, but the first 2 years or so, I suffered really badly from performance nerves. And even in like a small class, I would find I'd start sweating and my bow would start shaking. That's always the worst thing for a string player, that if your hand is shaking so much that you hear this through the bow. And that's a terrible thing. And of course, the more you worry about it, the worse it gets. How did I get through that? Uh, I tried to play as often as possible, to in as many situations as possible, even just to friends and all. I loved the music so much. I was determined to get through it somehow. And I think in the end, I just got bored with being nervous. And I know that sounds a ridiculous thing to say, but it's true. I was out there so much, and I started to, of course, learn some techniques to deal with it. But I have to say, at that time, it wasn't a subject that was studied or taken particularly seriously at any of the music colleges. There was none of the performance psychology that you have nowadays. So there wasn't a lot of help around. There weren't really many people I could ask. Um, and if you did ask, you would get an answer like, oh, yes, well, we all go through that. But there wasn't really uh, any techniques of how to deal with it. Um, I suppose the ultimate way to deal with it is to learn to focus on the music you love so much that other thoughts, the worries leave your mind, because your focus and the concentration is so great. But of course, that's something that is easier said than done, and it's something you have to learn as a performer.
I'm sure. I also believe that the more you practice and more focused you are, you tend to be more confident.
There's one very important point is that you have to have developed your technique in practice to the point where when you do go on stage and you find you're nervous, especially at the beginning of a performance, that you know you can rely on the technique that you have practiced so hard. And for example, with a left hand technique on the cello is so important, massively important to have a solid, firm left hand technique. I remember when I gave my debut at the Proms, it was with a difficult concerto by Frederick Delius, English composer, very calm piece, very quiet. It's not the usual traditional prom piece where everybody jumps up at the end and cheers. In fact, it fades away very quietly. So it's a difficult, concentrated piece, and it starts in a hard way, where right at the beginning there's a shift high up the cello. We call that a shift, and so I at that point I was so nervous, I lost my, I guess, concentration, and I the shift worked totally automatically,
Hmm.
and it might not have done. And had it not done, that might have really thrown me for the whole performance. But when that happened, I thought, I'm going to be all right tonight, because I really didn't know how I was going to get that note, but it happened, and it was as a result of the hours and hours and hours of practice. And then I started to relax, and then it went well.
You had to face some challenges in 2014, which actually stopped you from any public performances. That must have been quite a challenging time for you, right? How did you actually cope with that and come out successfully?
It was a horrible time. I stopped playing, as you said, in May 2000, 2014. So I, at that point, was 63. I've been playing the cello all my life, um, all my sort of professional life. And in fact, since student days, since the age of 16, I've been practicing like 6 hours a day. Maybe it got slightly less towards the end, but I was still, in a way, I felt I was at a peak of playing. And then suddenly, I lost in a performance in October the year before I stopped. I suddenly was lost a huge amount of power in the bowing arm, and I just couldn't understand it. And I knew it was really serious, because you don't suddenly have a feeling like that. I mean, I was a very strong player. I built up muscles. I've been playing for years, and then suddenly I could hardly hold the bow in this concert. So, of course, immediately I started going around the specialists and all these things, and I had an MRI scan on my neck, and they diagnosed a herniated disc, which is quite a common thing for anyone over 50. But the thing is, it was pressing on this nerve, which was blocking various. I'm not technical about these things, but I've got all the reports somewhere. But it was blocking various points. So I went for some tests, and actually they did the tapping and the stuff, and on some of the points there was actually no reaction at all. So obviously that nerve was quite damaged, and I made a decision. I could have had an operation, but I saw three different specialists, and all three of them said, we don't usually do this operation unless you have pain, because there are risks with it. Well, I never had pain. I just had this loss of power. So I got a young daughter and a young wife, a young family, and in the end, I decided I wasn't going to take that risk, because what I was told really was, as you haven't got pain, it's very likely this operation won't work, because the nerve may already be, whatever things were damaged were probably damaged. Fortunately for me, um, so I had an absolutely horrible 9 months where I was trying to play on and trying to find ways of doing music that was less needed less strength. But I mean, that was a horrible 6 months or 7 months or so, um, because I really didn't know what was going to happen. Once I made that decision, I then had a whole year with no work. I mean, it's a very scary thing, because I had a wonderful series of concerts coming up really all over the world, lovely things. And during that 6-month period, well, before that, I knew I was lying, because my manager would phone up and say, "Can you do this concert in Moscow?" And I said, and it was something of course I would have loved to have done. And I would say yes, yes, hoping that there would be a cure. But inside, I knew that it wasn't going to happen. So I had these concerts all planned in the diary, had to cancel the whole lot, which meant, of course, suddenly zero income, which is a very scary thing when you've got a young family, and you don't know what's going to come next. Now, luckily, I'd always had this great interest in music education, so I've been very involved with it. I had started a program for children in deprived areas with the UK government at the time, the Labour government, and it was called In Harmony. And I'd seen for myself the power of music to really change young people's lives. I mean, it's something I never will forget. So I've been involved with campaigning for music education. I'd always been in touch with the music colleges. I've given a lot of master classes around the world and in different places. So I had a good knowledge of music education. Of course, my father had been a principal at a London college. So it was kind of in my background. And then I saw the job come up at the Birmingham Conservatoire, as it was then. And I got it. And it was the first interview I'd actually ever done in my life, and remains to this day. So I have to tell you, talking about nerves, I was nervous then. But I just thought, I've got nothing to lose. And these were very experienced people at university. And I kind of really went for it. I said, this is what I can do for you. And I will deliver this for you. And I said to them, I really want this job. Um, I, I'm passionate about the music education. I know I can deliver for you. In a sense, they took a chance on me because I hadn't been proven at running any kind of establishment before, except my own career. And that was one point I made, because I think that they were perhaps worried that I didn't have the administration experience. Self-employed solo musician, the amount of admin you have to do, you might think of somebody's got a manager or something, but in the end, it's your decision which flight you get, how long before you want to arrive in a plane. So many different things. So I was doing a huge amount of admin actually every day in one way or another. So I didn't find that a problem at all.
Right. That's really good to hear. It is so good to know that you could channelize it in a very efficient way and come out of this successfully. You were a strong advocate for music education. I very distinctly remember our first meeting at the launch of the British Carnatic Choir in 2015. I think you were one of the first to support this initiative. With a successful career as a classical musician, how important it is to understand, appreciate different genre of music, and perhaps even collaborate.
I think it's extremely important. I think it's becoming ever more important. Classical music it's a kind of meaningless term, I think, because you're talking about 5, 6, 700 years of music. So it's constantly evolving. And I think that nowadays that there's a real interest in other kinds of music across the world. So and you will see this being incorporated into more and more compositions. For example, you look at the composer Nitin Sawhney, who is a friend of mine and a very, very fine composer. He, incorporates all kinds of elements of classical music, Indian music, and different instruments, which is very important. He's not just using the traditional classical orchestra. So I think it is really important to have that knowledge. I mean, I remember doing a concert, which at first I was really not sure how it was going to work, of Chinese tunes, Chinese folk melodies and things, with a traditional instrument Chinese orchestra. It was in Taiwan, and actually it worked really, really well. And when I sat down at that first rehearsal, I was amazed at the variety of sounds all those different traditional instruments could make. And it really was a revelation. I think, and I've always massively learned from collaborations with with people who are coming from a different area of music. Basically, that's what we're talking about here. You're talking about whether music works, whether it moves people. It is crucial now that classical musicians, in the way, the traditional way that we think of that, expands its horizons, and classical music expands its horizon.
That's very good to know, very inspiring. You have premiered in more than 60 works of cello. You have performed with some of the world's greatest orchestras, done many recordings, and received worldwide acclaim. What is your wish for yourself now?
It was obviously, I've been at Birmingham Conservatoire for 5 years, achieved, I think the whole place achieved a lot there. There were great people working there with me. Were given the royal title by Her Majesty the Queen, which transforms in a way the way people think of a place, particularly outside England. I think, it was an extremely important moment for the Conservatoire, that. And we moved to a fantastic new building in 2017. Um, and I felt in a way that I I'd had done 5 years there, and I think the place was transformed in that time. We also joined with the School of Acting, which was very interesting. We merged with the existing School of Acting, and so that all became under the umbrella of Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. And we were starting to do quite a lot of collaborations with the actors and musicians, having to do a little bit of acting in their roles. It was fascinating, and I think very, very good on all sides. I felt it was time for me to move on. That's all. That's all I can say, really. And I would love to continue to give back to music because it's been good to me. I love it. I'm still absolutely passionate about it. So I'm certainly not going to be sitting around doing nothing. And we'll see what the future holds. As we all know, this is a very strange time at the moment, and it's not the best time to go job seeking. But I'm not in any hurry. And I think if I'm to do something, it's very likely to be one big last job. And so I don't want to rush into anything.
That's really good to hear. Music for everyone. This is perhaps one of the main reasons for your association with the two charities, Systema England and the charity with the UK government. The purpose of this initiative is to transform lives of young people through music. That's an excellent initiative.
No, I'm not happy because there's always a lot more that can be done. What I have seen is that the In Harmony, which is what Systema England, how that really began, is in 6 schools in the UK. I would like to see it in far more because the way music has transformed those schools that are not in privileged areas by any means. I mean, they're in some of the lowest 10% of deprivation in the UK. One doesn't want to keep going on about that because the schools themselves are excellent, but they have become much better schools because of the music there. It has changed students' attitudes there. It's changed the young people's attitudes. They want to go to school. They look forward to the lessons. It's wonderful to see. I could give you one example. The program in London was based actually on 2 schools, and it was in a poor area of London where these schools were traditionally great rivals, almost to the point you could say of being a sort of gang situation, so that the schools didn't talk to each other. The parents of the children didn't talk to each other because they were at those schools. Now, when this program came, they actually had to collaborate. It was just the way that it was going to be. And it's transformed that relationship. I mean, it's completely changed it. That's all forgotten now. That's what music can do. It can bring people and societies together. So it's more important at this time than ever. And I think the danger with COVID, apart from the horrible disease it is, the danger is that all countries are going to have to save money. It's cost the world so much money. And the arts are very often seen as an easy target. They're not seen as totally essential. In other words, it's not like emptying the rubbish bins. It's not those services that have to be done. But I'm really can tell you that music is going to play a huge part in the world coming out of this, because it is something that binds people together. Everybody likes some kind of music. I've had people come up to me and say, "Oh, I'm not musical." And I say, "But I'm sure you like music." Or when they say that, what they mean is they're not playing something, or so they think they're not musical. But I mean, people, there's the expression soundtrack to your life.
Yeah.
Everybody's got music that means a huge amount to them. So it's something that really can bring people together. And to deprive children of that opportunity would, at this point, through cuts, would be a huge mistake in my view. To say that the arts, we need that in our lives. To say that I mean, there was an appalling expression used about retraining musicians in the UK for something that was viable, I think was the term used. Well, who knows what's viable? Look at the state of our high streets. Look at the shops that are closing down. So is being a shop assistant viable? We need music, and musicians are definitely viable. It's just that we need support at this time, as everybody else. It's a very difficult time, but we must not lose music in our lives.
Very true. It is important to understand the significant impact on young lives through music. One need not be a musician necessarily, but the impact of merely listening to music even can work wonders.
I mean, I completely agree with that. I think that had we not had music during this pandemic, it would have been so much worse. And in many ways, music can be a lifesaver for people. Um, just listening to music you love, that's a huge mental stimulus, I believe. It can
Very
be
true.
something for people to really fall back on, rely on, and we can't have that taken away.
True, physical health and mental health are equally important. How do you think it is important for a musician to have a healthy mindset in order to deliver music well?
Going back to what we said at the beginning, these kind of artistic professions which are really quite insecure, particularly at the very highest top level. You never really, but there's the saying, "You're as good as your last performance." And it is true that if you mess up in public, it very quickly gets around. The way the world is now, it will be around by the next morning. I mean, some people can't deal with that situation, others can. So I think that's a fascinating topic. And I guess it extends beyond the arts. It goes to sport as well.
Yeah.
There's a lot of parallels there with people who can perform really well on the biggest stages, in the biggest tournaments, the biggest competitions. It's very similar to being able to do that on a stage or on a concert platform. And some people can it, actually the experience of that concert platform that will bring the best out of some people, but in others they can't deal with it. So that's a fascinating question, I think. I mean, so mental health is extremely important for, well, it's important for everyone, but it's definitely important for musicians and actors. They have to be very secure, and that comes from really their mental approach.
You have had a very successful musical career. What is success for you?
My approach was to always um, try to give my best, to play music that was good music, and to bring it to as many people as possible. And that's really gone through my whole life as a musician. And it's behind my passion to introduce children to music, because how can it be right for children to come out of school sometimes knowing absolutely nothing about some of the greatest achievements of mankind? Some of the great symphonies, the great concertos, the beautiful music that's been written. And it is possible in many places in the world for children to leave school, have no knowledge of that at all. Now, is that what you call education? You see, I don't. So this has been my passion, to introduce children, to introduce everyone to music as much as I could. Of course, some people will misconstrue that. They think, oh, he wants to be popular himself, or he wants to make more money because he's doing something which is um, for the masses, I suppose you could say. But that was never the reason I did it. and it was, and I think you could see it as a very snobbish approach to say that you should only play music to people who already know about it. My passion was always to inform about music, and that's what's really driven me, and it still does.
That's very good to know, very inspiring. A career in music is not much encouraged, especially with parents.
Yes, and of course, at the moment, this is an incredibly important question. And I don't just want to limit it to music. I think that there are careers in the arts, particularly in the theatre, which are absolutely in parallel. It's a horrible time because as we know, concerts and plays and theatre productions have been closed. So at the moment, it looks like there aren't jobs, but it will come back. We know that there are vaccine on the way, vaccines on the way. It will come back, and I have this belief, which is perhaps slightly controversial, but that the students who have graduated in this time into this horrible conditions, the ones that come through it. So we're talking, say, the end of the autumn of next year, 2021, because they will have had to have an inner resilience to come through it. And they will be brilliantly placed when the knocks do come, as they always do in self-employed professions. They'll be so well placed mentally to deal with it. Now, that's possibly quite a controversial view, but I think that there will always be music. There will always be music. There will always be theatre productions. There'll always be films. There will always be acting. So there's no cause for despair. I mean, until this horrible COVID. So it is a profession that makes money. Now, and we know that there are people who have done extremely well out of music, extremely well out of films, extremely well. Of course, it's tough, but you can make money and you can make a living, you can make an existence. And don't, something I always said to my students was, don't just limit yourself to performing. There is, and you need recording producers who can read scores brilliantly, who can edit and know what's right and what's wrong and what's still going to make a great performance. Actually, the knowledge and that they have could work extremely well in a slightly different area where they need that knowledge of music, and but they can still be very successful.
Perhaps due to some kind of insecurity, which I'm sure is there in every other profession as well. I feel the creative industry and the arts are a much more demanding profession, if I may say so, from an artist's viewpoint. Very well said. Very useful information for the younger generation. What is it that you are most grateful for today?
I'm grateful for the kind of unspoken standards of excellence that were in my family background when I grew up. Well, my father, who was a very fine composer and organist, and also brilliant on the sort of theory side of music, the harmony. That's what he actually taught at the Royal College. The theoretics of music. He was brilliant at that. I was with my brother, who was 3 years older. I was with his lyricist Tim Rice, lived with us, and the concert pianist John Lill, who won the Tchaikovsky Moscow competition. He was 7 years older than me. Um, and there was me with alongside these brilliant people. And you could say that that would be a competitive atmosphere. It wasn't, because we were all doing very different things. But what there was this really unsaid thing. It created a certain sense of standard that I've never forgotten. And I mean, over my career, I'm incredibly grateful for having been able to travel to places which I probably never would have gone to. Well, almost certainly wouldn't have gone to. Fascinating countries. I can't just reel them all off, but there were so many. And then, of course, although you get a fleeting impression, you know that there are places you really want to return to, perhaps on holiday or something. So I'm really grateful for that. Although I have to say, traveling with cello was often extremely difficult and remains that certainly today. Um, I'm very grateful for that. I'm very grateful for some of the musical collaborations I had working with someone like Yehudi Menuhin, who interestingly was incredibly interested very early on in crossing the genres with classical music, playing with people like Ravi Shankar and Stefan Grappelli. He was always fascinated by music from all over the world. And I worked with him. I spent a lot of time with him, and he was actually a lovely man, which is not something you can always say about the great conductors. There's sometimes, but I've just been so grateful for some of the things that when I was a student, perhaps I thought I would never do, because I recorded the Dvorak cello concerto in Prague in the very hall that it had its first performance there. You know, and uh, to those are things when you're a student that you think, well, perhaps I aim to do something like that. But when it actually happens, you have to feel extremely grateful for those opportunities.
That's very good to know. Very inspiring. How would you describe yourself in 3 words?
Always actively caring.
Best advice you have received so far?
On my first day at the Royal College of Music as a student, so I would have been 17, I ran into a former teacher of mine when I'd been ages before, when I was about 11, 12, at the junior department there. Lovely cellist and teacher called Runa Martin. Um, and she said to me, Julian, you've got at the most 4 years here, and don't waste a single minute of it, because it's the only time in your life that you'll be able to practice. And and I think I never forgot that. And I did make the best use of my time there. And I just think I was incredibly lucky to run into that piece of advice from someone I really admired and loved. Maybe if it was somebody I didn't respect, I wouldn't have listened. But coming from her, that meant a huge amount to me. That was wonderful advice.
The dream that you are yet to achieve?
There's so much to do to bring music into people's lives. And I think in music education, there's so much more to be done. So if I can help with that in the years I have left, I will do my best to do that.
Who have been your main influences in your life?
The reason I became a cellist, I have to put down basically to one person, which was the great Russian cellist, Mstislav Rostropovich. He really inspired me. He's a wonderful, wonderful musician and cellist. But I've learned a huge amount from all kinds of different people in different walks of life.
Your favorite holiday destination?
We went on honeymoon to Corsica and we had a great time. It's a lovely island, really beautiful place. Another would be, if I'm allowed to have two, Sweden. I love Stockholm, the Venice of the North. And it's a beautiful city. That would be another choice of mine.
Your favorite food?
I love some Italian food. I love some really fine Chinese food and fine Indian food and even fine English food.
What would you have taken up if you were not a cellist?
If I hadn't gone into music, I'd have wanted to be a writer, some kind of writing.
The performance that you would always cherish?
It was the last concert the night before the change from British to Chinese rule in Hong Kong. And the first half of the concert, I was playing Elgar Cello Concerto, British music, with a British orchestra, the Academy of St Martin in the Fields, conducted by Sir Neville Mariner. The second half was all Chinese music with a Chinese orchestra and a Chinese conductor. Now, those of you who know the Elgar Cello Concerto, definition of Britishness, and a nostalgic and full of those emotions of, in a sense, something being lost. And I knew it was going to be an emotional occasion. All the politicians were there from both the UK and China, but I wasn't prepared for the sort of extraordinary feeling of emotion in the hall that night. It was absolutely, you could touch it. And the last bars of that Elgar were really quite extraordinary. So if there's one concert I had to pick out, it would be that.
Fantastic. This has been a very, very inspiring chat for me. Thank you so much, Professor Julian, for your valuable time and inputs. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.